10 girls walked into the evil forest. 9 of them never came back. This is not a story about the 9. This is the story of what they each gave up so that one could survive. My name is Jessie, your narrator, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the village of Umunede, in a time when the forest still had teeth, the river still had memory, and the spirits were not yet patient with the living. Listen carefully, because some of these girls, they are still in that forest. It began with the prince Chukwuemeka, son of Igwe Obiora, the most beloved king in all of Umunede. Woke up one morning, unable to rise from his mat. His eyes were open, but they saw nothing. His chest moved, but barely. He did not speak. He did not eat. He simply lay there, like a flame that had not yet decided whether to go out. The king sent for every healers in the land. They came from 7 villages. They burned herbs that made the air thick with smoke. They poured libation that darkened the earth. They chanted through the night until their voice cracked. Nothing. The prince remained between worlds, not dead, not fully living, as though something had reached into him and taken the part of him that knew how to be alive. Then on the 3rd day, the sickness spread. A child in the eastern quarter, an elder near the river, 3 women from the weaving compound. Within a week, 14 people lay on their mats with the same emptiness in their eyes, the same shallow breath, the same silence where their voice used to be. Umunede was being eaten from the inside, and nobody knew why. It was the eldest woman in the village, Mama Ozoamaka, 103 years of age, blind in both eyes, but seeing things the rest of them could not, who finally said what everyone had been afraid to name. This is not sickness, she said. This is a depth. She told them what she had seen in her blindness. 30 years ago, before many of them were born, a young man from Umunede had done something unforgivable. He had gone into the forbidden quarter of the evil forest, the grove of Allah, goddess of the earth, and he had stolen from her sacred ground. He had taken a stone, just a stone, smooth and white, the size of a fist. But that stone had marked the boundary between the land of the living and the land of the spirits. And the moment he moved it, the boundary moved with it. The man had long since died, but debt made against the earth do not die with the debtor. They sleep, they wait, and when the earth decides she has waited long enough, she collects. The only cure, Mama Ozoamaka said, was the egg of life. The egg of life? Even speaking its name made the elders look at the floor. The egg was laid generation after generation by no ordinary creation. It rested in the deepest part of the evil forest, a place so far inside that the trees had no name and the light had never once touched the ground. It was guided by 14 giant serpents, each one as wide as 3 men, standing side by side, each one ancient as the hills themselves. No man had ever returned from attempting to retrieve it, which is why it had to be maidens. The oracle was consulted through the night, and by morning, the condition had been laid down. 10 virgin maidens, unmarried, untouched by grief or shame, each one willing, each one brave. Willing, that word is important, because what Mama Uzoamaka did not say in the palace, but what every elder already knew was this: not all 10 would return. The serpent guiding the egg would demand appeasement, blood appeasement. Each serpent that stood between the maidens and the egg would take one of them in exchange for passage. The elders had counted. There were 14 serpents. There were 10 maidens. The mathematics of it sat in every elder's chest like a stone. But without the egg, everyone dies. The prince, the 14 sick, eventually the whole village. And so the call went out, and something remarkable happened. By the time the sun was halfway across the sky, 47 young women had presented themselves at the palace gates. 47. In a village where everyone knew what the forest did to those who entered it, where mothers had buried sons who merely wandered too close to its edge, where the oldest story all ended the same way. 47 girls said, "Choose me." Some of them, you could see the terror on their faces, hands tight at their sides, chin lifted to hide the trembling, but they stood there anyway. That is the only kind of bravery that is real, not the absence of fear. The decision to move forward while fear sits heavy in your chest. The 10 we are choosing, their names: Adaeze, the king's niece who volunteered first; Ngozi, 17, the best runner in the village; Chisom, who had not slept since her brother fell sick; Amara, quiet, watchful, who noticed everything; Obiageli, who everyone called Obi, who made people laugh even on dark days; Uloma, the tallest, who carried herself like she had never once been afraid; Nkeshinyere, who had been promised in marriage next dry season; Adanna, twin sister to one of the sick, who said she would bring the egg back or not come back herself; Onyinye, the youngest, 14 years old, who the elders almost turned away until she looked the elders in the eyes and said, "I am not afraid of the forest. I grew up on its edge." And Chidinma, who had a cough she could not shake. She had been unwell for 2 weeks with a chest cold that would not release her, who the elders told, "Not you, not this time," who came back the next morning before dawn and stood alone in the palace courtyard and said quietly to no one in particular, "There are only 9. The oracle said 10. I am the 10th. They let her go. They should not have let her go. Before they entered, Mama Uzoamaka was brought to the forest edge on her wooden chair, blind eyes pointing forward, and she spoke to them the laws of the forest. "There are rules," she said. "The forest has always had rules. You do not enter it as an invader. You enter it as a guest, and a guest obeys the law of the house." She held up one hand, one finger at a time. "First, you will not look back once you have entered. The forest feeds on longing. If you look back towards the village, you are inviting it in. Second, when you reach the grove of whispers, the part of the forest where the tree grows so close together that no wind can pass through, you will not make a sound, not a word, not a breath louder than necessary. The spirit that lives there is not evil, but it's easily offended, and it has never once given a second warning. Third, you will not accept anything from any creature you meet inside. Not food, not water, not a hand extended in help. The forest offers things that look like gifts. They are not gifts. Fourth, you will not separate. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, whatever calls your name in a voice you recognize, you do not leave the group. The forest learns your love and uses them against you. Fifth, when you find the nest of the great serpent, you will not run. Running is a language they understand. It tells them you are a prey. She lowered her head. Obey these rules, Mama Ozamaka said, and some of you will come home. Some, not all. Adeze, who led them, turned to face the forest. She did not look back at her mother in the crowd. One by one, the 10 girls followed her. The first thing the forest did was take their torches. Not dramatically, not with wind or spirits. The flames simply dimmed, one by one, until there was only darkness and the thin silver thread of moonlight fighting through the canopy above. They kept walking. Amara, the quiet one, the one who noticed everything, was the first to see that the path behind them had closed. The tree had shifted, silently, almost politely, as though the forest was simply tidying up after their arrival. She did not mention this to the others. There was no point. They were not going back anyway. For the first hour, nothing happened. That was almost worse. The forest was watching them. They could all feel it. That particular quality of attention, when something large and old and patient fixes gaze on you and simply waits. Obi, the one who always made people laugh, opened her mouth twice to say something, and both times closed it again. Even she understood this was not a place for her kind of light. Then the path split. 3 paths going in 3 directions. Mama Ozamaka did not mention this. The oracle did not warn them. They stood at the fork for a long moment. It was Chisom, whose brother was lying sick at home, whose urgency was the sharpest of all 10 of them, who pointed to the middle path and said, "The air smells of water that way. Water means the deep forest. We go through the middle." She was right. But being right and being safe are not always the same thing. The river had no name in any language they knew. It was wide. Wider than it should have been this deep in the forest. The water was black and moved slowly. And when Oloma held her torch close to the surface, none of them could see the bottom. And on the other bank, sitting on a smooth stone as though she had been waiting specifically for them, was an old woman. She was dressed in white. Her hair was long and silver and moved silently, even though there was no wind. She smiled when she saw them, a generous, grandmotherly smile. "My daughters," she said, "you look tired. Come, let me help you cross. I know where the stepping stones are." Remember the third rule. You will not accept anything from any creature you meet inside. Adeze held up her hand, stopped, and shook her head at the old woman. The old woman's smile did not change. "I am no spirit," she said warmly. "I am just an old woman who knows this forest. Let me show you the way across. There are stones just beneath the surface. I will guide your feet." 9 of the girls stayed put. Nkeshinyere, who had been promised in marriage next dry season, who had someone waiting for her at home, whose wanting to return was the sharpest and most desperate of them, took one step towards the river. "Nkeshi!" But Nkeshinyere was already in the water, knee deep, then waist deep, moving toward the old woman who was still smiling, still beckoning, still looking exactly like the harmless old grandmother. The water took her at the middle of the river. No violence, no sound. The river simply received her. One moment she was there. The next, the surface of the water was flat and black and unbordered, as though Nkeshinyere had never existed at all. The 9 remaining girls stood at the bank. They crossed the river in silence, finding the stepping stones themselves. Stones just below the surface that Amara found with careful feet. The old woman was not on the other side when they arrived. She had gotten what she came for. They felt the groove of whisper before they saw it. The air changed first, became thicker, heavier on the chest, as though the atmosphere were asking them to be still. Then the sound of the forest stopped. All of them at once, the insects, the distant movement, the forest breathing, everything off, like a great silence had been laid over the world like a cloth. Adeze stopped walking, turned to look at the others. Her eyes said everything her voice could not. "The groove, we are here," not a sound. They moved in single file, breathing through their nose. Even their footstep, carefully, heel to toe, like learning to walk again in a language they did not know. The groove was not short. It stretched ahead of them in darkness. The tree so dense that turning sideways was the only way through. They moved like shadows, like thoughts, like things that did not quite exist yet. Amara counted the time by their own heartbeats. 50 beats, 100, 200. They were almost through. She could see where the trees began to thin on the far side, where the path opened again into fuller darkness. 20 more steps, maybe 15. And then Chidinma sneezed. It was not a loud sneeze, the kind that cannot be helped. A catarrh sneeze, wet and sudden, that she had been suppressing for the entire journey, that her poor swollen sinuses had finally refused to hold. She covered her mouth immediately. Too late. The groove heard it. They felt it before they saw it. A pressure. The kind that builds in your ear when you go too deep underwater. A presence that displaced a very thin air around it. Chidinma made no sound. She was simply no longer there. Between one step and the next, the girl who had insisted she was the 10th maiden, who had stood alone in the palace courtyard and claimed her place, was gone. Vanished into the dark between the trees as though the groove had reached out a hand, decided she was the payment for the disturbance, and closed its finger. 8 girls stood in the groove of whisper. Obi, the one who made people laugh, who had smiled through every hard thing in her life, had tears running down her face. She made no sound. None of them did. They mourned Chidinma in the only language the groove permitted. Silence. The forest was not done with them. It never is. The 4th rule: you will not separate. Whatever calls your name in a voice you recognize was tested less than an hour after the groove. Adamma heard her sister's voice, clear as day, from somewhere to the left of the path. Her sister's specific laugh, the one that crinkled her nose, the one Adamma had heard 10,000 times since they were born into the world together, floating through the tree. Ada, Ada, I am here. Ada, come. Adanna turned towards the sound before she even made the decision to turn. Her body was responding to her sister's voice the way the breathing responds to air. It was Uloma who caught her. Both arms around Adanna from behind, pulling her back into the path. Adanna struggled, silently, desperately, because her sister's voice kept coming, kept calling, getting clearer and closer, and more painfully familiar. Amara looked at the figure in the tree. She saw the feet not touching the ground. Not quite. She turned Adanna's face away from it and held it between her hands and shook her head once. This is not your sister. Your sister is at home. That is the forest wearing your sister's voice like a costume. Adanna understood, and the sound that came out of her, silent, strangled, a grief that had no room to be expressed, was the worst sound in a forest full of terrible things. 3 more trial before the serpent nest. A section of paths that sloped downwards into what smells like water, but was in fact a pit. A hollow in the earth that had no bottom, disguised by a thin surface of moss and leaf. Onyinyechi, the youngest, the one who grew up in the forest edge, who knew the smell of false ground, saved them all by stopping them 6 steps before it. A tree that bled when Obiageli accidentally brushed it with her shoulder, that bled and then opened its back like a mouth. She ran. They all ran. The 5th rule, do not run, was for the serpent. No one had said anything about trees. And the fire. A clearing ahead of them, warm and orange, smelling of food and humanity and safety. A fire surrounded by empty mats, bowls of food, calabashes of water, everything they had needed for hours. The 3rd rule, you will not accept anything. They walked past the fire without stopping. Obiageli, who had not eaten since dawn, whose stomach was loud enough that Ngozi could hear it, walked past the bowls of food with her eyes straight ahead and her jaw set like someone walking past their own hearts. When they were 20 steps past the clearing, they heard the fire go out behind them, and something else, the sound of the emptying mouths folding, of the bowls emptying, as though whatever had set the trap was clearing it away, returning the items to wherever they had come from, waiting to try again with the next people. They smelled the serpents before they saw them. Not a foul smell, something older than foul. The smell of the earth itself, of deep soil and ancient stones, and something underneath both of those things that had no name in any living language. And then the clearing opened before them, and the 8 girls stopped and stared. Each serpent was the width of 3 men side by side. Their scales were the color of the deep earth, brown and black and gold, and the moonlight slid off them like water off stone. They moved the way slow rivers moved. Patient, inevitable, as though they had been here since before the first tree grew and expected to be here after the last one fell. At the center of the mood, cradled in a natural horror of the earth, was the egg. It was the size of a man's head, perfectly white, and it glowed, not like fire, not like the sun, but like something that carried its own source of warmth, like moonlight had been compressed into a shell. It was the most beautiful thing any of them had ever seen. The 14 ancient serpents lay between them and it. Adeze, the one who led them there, who had not looked back once since the village, who had held the group together through water and silence and grief, turned to face her sisters. Her eyes said what her mouth could not say in front of the sacred ground. We knew what this would cost. The oracle told the elders. The elders told Mama Ozamaka, and Mama Ozamaka chose not to tell us, because she knew if we understand fully, not even 47 brave girls would have volunteered. The serpents will not be defeated. They will not be tricked. They will not be reasoned with. They will only be appeased. What happened next? I will not dress it in poetry. Some things deserve to be said plainly. The first serpent raised his head, fixed his gaze on the group, and moved. He did not lunge, did not brush. He simply moved towards them with the patience of something that has never once had to hurry. And as it came, Adeze stepped forward to meet it. The remaining 7 girls tried to hold her. Uloma grabbed her arm. Adana reached for her shoulder, but Adeze shook her head, and the look on her face was not fear. It was something that looked almost unbearably like peace. She spoke to the serpent in the old language, words that none of the others knew completely. The words the oracle spoke, words that meant, I come as an offering, I come willingly, let my sister pass. The serpent received her, and the path to the egg opened by 1 step. I will not make you carry each departure in full details. The forest has had enough of your grief already. But know this, each girl who stepped forward did so the same way Adeze had. Not dragged, not forced, walking towards the serpent the size of a river with their name on his tongue. Uloma, who had never once been afraid, who found her fear at the very end and walked into it anyway. Chisom, whose brother would leave because of what she did here, who thought of his face as the darkness took the light. Obi, who was at the very last moment, found her voice softly in this sacred place and sang a single bar of a village song she had always loved. A small defiance, a small joy, taken back from the darkness at the end. One by one, until the path was fully opened, until only one girl remained. Amara, the quiet one, the one who noticed everything, who had spent the entire journey watching, calculating, protecting where she could, grieving what she could not protect. She stood alone before the egg of life. The 14 serpents were still, their eyes on her. Their ancient bodies arranged around the mold like the fingers of a hand. And she was the small thing at the center of that hand. She walked forward, slowly, not running. The fifth rule, not looking away, not speaking, not betraying anything that could be read as weakness or aggression or fear. She walked the way waters walked, finding the path of least resistance, moving around the great coils without touching them, close enough to feel the heat that radiated from their scales, a warm like banked coals, like the earth's own body temperature. Her hand closed around the egg. It was warm. It pulsed once against her palm, like a heartbeat answering her own, and the serpents lowered their heads, like they had been waiting for this. Like the whole arrangement, the forest, the trial, the terrible cost had been a test whose answer was always going to be a girl who moved without greed, without desperation, without anything in her hands but willingness. Amara held the egg of life against her chest and began the long walk back. 3 days had passed. The elders had agreed if the girls did not return by the third sunset, it would be official. The village would grieve 10 daughters, and the sick would be made as comfortable as possible for however long they had remaining. The third sunset had come and gone. The village was already grieving. Igwe Obiora had not eaten in 2 days. He sat beside his son, whose breath was now so shallow the feather they held beneath his nose barely moved, and he held his son's hand and he said, quietly, privately, in the dark of his own heart, I am sorry. I sent children to pay a debt I did not make. I am sorry. The village square was quiet in the way that only deep collective grief is quiet, not peaceful, not calm, but hollowed out. People moving slowly, women sitting together but not speaking, children kept close. The whole village wrapped in particular silence of people preparing to accept the unacceptable. A figure at the tree line, small, moving slowly, carrying something. A child near the forest edge saw her first. A boy, 8 years old, who had been staring at the forest for 3 days the way children do, convinced of things adults have already let go of. He ran. She is coming, she is coming, one is coming back. The village poured out of every doors, every compound, every corner. Old men running who had not run in 20 years. Mothers screaming names, Adeze, Ngozi, Shisom, and then stopping when they saw only one face, one figure, one pair of hands carrying a glowing egg. And understanding the mathematics of it in the same moment, they felt the joy of it. One came back. One came back with the egg. One came back and it was enough. She did not speak. She walked through the crowd directly to the king's compound, directly to the prince's mat, knelt beside him. She held the egg over his chest, and Mama Uzoamaka, who had been brought outside to feel the morning sun and the sound of the drums, spoke the words the oracle had given her. The egg cracked, not dramatically. A small, clean split down the center, and what came from it was not what anyone expected. Not liquid, not smoke. Lights. The light moved deliberately, as though it knew where to go. It found the prince first, settled into his chest like a hand pressing warmth back into something cold. He breathed deeply, once as though breathing for the first time. Then his eyes opened and they saw. And in the tree compound where the other sick lay, the same light moved through walls and distance, as though walls and distance were nothing. And one by one, across Umunede, people sat up on their mats. The debt was paid. The earth satisfied. They built a shrine for the 9. It stands at the edge of the forest in Umunede to this day. 9 carved figures, each one bearing the name of a girl who walked into darkness so that her village could stay in the light. Adeze, Ngozi, Shisom, Obiageli, Uloma, Nkeshinyere, Adana, Onyinye, Shedema. The one who sneezed, and the one who stepped forward first, and the one who sang at the end. All of them remembered. Amara lived a long life. She became the village keeper of sacred knowledge, the one who knew the rules of the forest, who trained the next generation, who made sure no one ever again forgot what the forest asked of those who entered it carelessly. She never spoke about what she had seen inside. Not the river woman, not the groove, not the serpent, not the face of the girls as they stepped forward one by one. Some things, she said, belongs to the forest, and the forest keeps what it is given. This story has been carried in the hearts of Igbo grandmothers for longer than anyone alive can remember. They tell it to their daughters, not as a horror story, though it is that. Not as a warning, though it is that too. They tell it as a true thing about what bravery actually looks like. Not the absence of fear, not the guarantee of return, just walking forward anyway. I am your narrator. This has been Echoes of the Spirit, where the forest remembers what the village forgot.